Welcome to Off the Record News. I'm your host, Diana Longrie. Thank you for tuning in. Off the Record News is brought to you from the Valley Access Studios out of Stillwater. Now today we are going to be receiving an update about what's going on in the City of Grant from City Council member Loren Sederstrom. Thank you, Mr. Sederstrom, for being here.
Well, thank you for having me, Diana. It's really important that you help me perpetuate this all around Grant and keep the residents aware of what's going on. Today we're going to do something a little different. I'm going to track the meeting a little closer so people can see the dysfunction that is alive within Grant. Now, currently, they're trying to say that the minority is disruptive, et cetera, but what I want people to watch for is how many times the mayor interrupts or takes the floor away from the minority before they even get a chance to speak. One of the clips is going to be a whole 2 minutes long. A year ago in March, they wouldn't let me speak at all. So, of course, again, one of the continuing issues is how to put things on the agenda and how to amend the agenda. In essence, what they're trying to do is they've changed the procedures so much that we have little or no input in the other than our votes. We can't put things on the agenda because they say, well, you have to put it under the discussion area, and you need a motion, a second, and then we will discuss it, and then we take a vote. And if we vote on it, we'll go on the agenda. Well, it's a 3-2 vote, so how often do we get anything on the agenda? And for example, something that we've been following since last September and October is the hydrovac dumping. And I have attempted to put it on 3-4 times. I've even written the ordinance, and we'll see that later in the program, how they come up with different reasons why we can't do this. It's anything that I come up with, they will not vote on. As a matter of fact, Councilman Kopp has said he would never vote on anything that I have brought up or I'm on the side of. So instead of worrying about doing his job and what's good for the citizens, it's pursuing a vendetta against me personally, which doesn't make any sense. But this first clip is about amending the agenda. It's about a 2-minute clip, and this will show you some of the travails that we go through trying to get issues of importance on the agenda.
Amend the regular agenda.
Second.
I already got mine in.
You did, but
I don't think that is a raise.
I do want to hear what Mr. Lanu has to say here. What exactly did you want to add to the agenda, Mr. Lanu?
Motion to add the 3M dump site and the Bel Air sanitation super. Actually,
Yep, those two issues. No,
Wait a minute.
No. Those are the two issues
I have
you
the
want to
floor,
add.
Mayor Huber. I have the floor. Would you please hold on? I have the floor.
Yeah, please
Are we
explain.
using Robert's rules?
Hold on,
today?
Council.
Yeah,
I have the floor.
Here's the thing. We wait to be recognized by the mayor.
And I was recognized.
But for example, we wait to be recognized by the mayor, and that's a way of assuring order and that we're not speaking over each other. So I think there had been a motion, and then there was a statement from the mayor that was to the effect that I'd like to hear something, and so if we could take it from there and speak one at a time.
if I may just ask a question here, and Mr. Lanu, you know how this system works. If we wish to put something on the agenda, what we do is we bring it up under council discussion, which is number 8, okay? We bring it up there, and then we determine whether or not a majority of the council would like to discuss that. Now, if the majority of the council would like to discuss that during the intervening month, whomever is able to get the council to add something then goes ahead and forwards information regarding that. Now, that has not happened with the 2 items that I see in my packet, so I was assuming those were going to be handled under discussion items. You wanted to tell us about those and get those onto next month's agenda so that the public could be aware that those are going to be on the agenda. And if someone were interested in it, they could, of course, be here for that meeting. Because if someone were interested in it now, they wouldn't be here to hear it if we put it on the agenda right now.
Certainly the issue about the 3M settlement and its impact on the city of Grant is a very timely issue and is something that certainly the council by all rights, should be discussing right now, because this is when other cities are discussing this very issue right now on how they can be a part of those settlement dollars. And yet, on the other hand, the way that the Mayor Huber has this set up, he's, on the one hand, does not want anything that the minority is talking about to be heard by the public, and yet he's pretending to say that because he wants the public to know what the minority has to say, well, this is the process we have to go through. And quite frankly, under the open meeting law, Mr. Sederstrom, the council can put, as long as it's a regular council meeting that's during its regular time and has been noticed the way that it's supposed to be noticed, the council can actually put any item on that agenda because it is the regularly scheduled meeting of that council, and that the public is expecting that they are doing the business of that council. And of course, talking about the 3M settlement and how it impacts the city of Grant would definitely be one of those items.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. The other interesting thing to note is in December of 2014, they rapidly changed all the procedures for the city council before we took office in January.
And what year was that?
2014. We came on the council in 2015, and amazingly they changed all these procedures in December 2014. So that's very interesting. And they talk about, that who's interrupting, et cetera. Now, in that clip, you saw that Larry Lanoux had the floor, and he was interrupted multiple times by the mayor.
And I did see that the city attorney then interjected himself into the discussion and was, in essence, indicating that Councilmember Lanoux was the one who was recognized, had been recognized by the mayor, and he hadn't even finished his sentences yet. And as you said, Mayor Huber was just constantly interrupting him, so he couldn't say anything, and nobody can even comprehend what any of them are saying.
Well, watch for this pattern through this whole program. That's one of the points I'm trying to make. Let's play the next clip, 581. This is about the deputy mayor interrupting.
No, we're not talking about this.
Well, you have recognized.
We're done.
You're not recognized,
Well,
Mr. Carr.
provided
No,
15 pages of document prior to the meeting.
We are
We
a
don't do
small community.
You are a
We
small
can
community.
come to the meeting. I know you can't talk louder than me. Nobody can.
Well, actually,
Anyway,
I
so
can.
we're a small community,
Hold on.
and I am going to finish. And within
See what happens, I had the
within hours of coming to the meeting, if there is an emergency,
Nobody can talk louder than Mayor Carr. Did you notice that?
I did hear that.
It's ludicrous, and I'm bringing some of these points up that are rather irritating to watch, and I apologize for that. But what I'm trying to do is produce the flavor of what I have to endure. It doesn't matter how well prepared I am. And he was holding up 17 pages that he gave to the clerk to consider for discussion. Okay, so he has all this information, and they're roadblocking every chance they get, so we cannot participate in the meeting. They're trying to silence us, and that's just the way it is. And the next clip we're going to add is they're not adding things to the agenda, and this is a very short clip, so we'll talk on the other side.
We are not going to add agenda items like this. It is not going to happen. Mr. Carr made it fairly clear on his own. We're going to go ahead and vote on the regular agenda right now. I have a first and a second for Mr. Carr and Mr. Kopp on the.
Okay, so he says we are not going to add these items to the agenda. So the items he's talking about, are they the items that
Larry was talking about. These
that
clips
he was
are.
trying to get on the agenda to say, let's talk about that 3M settlement and its impact on the city of Grant, correct?
Absolutely. The other interesting thing is, across from Wildwood School, on the southeast corner of County Road 12 and County Road 9, which is Jamaica, that was a former 3M dump site, and it's got a number on it. It's been listed, so it's on the EPA watch list, okay? And it hasn't been mediated. So this would qualify us for some funds, but they won't even discuss it. So that's kind of interesting.
And unfortunately, while all the other communities that are impacted by the 3M settlement are discussing how they are going to be part of the distribution of the settlement funds, the majority of the council at the city of Grant are dragging their feet and not doing anything. And so you, as a community, may be left behind and last in line.
Well, what's going to happen is we're not even going to be invited to the party, so to speak. We're not going to get any funding. We're not going to be considered. It was an $850 million settlement, as you well know. It was in the paper. I actually had, when I put another, for the fourth time, I've put a proposal for a hydrovac ordinance under waste disposal 32-245. And I also photocopied the newspaper article with the 3M settlement. They've had it in their packet. They've had a chance to review it. So they know that it is a valid, reasonable topic to consider. There's the documentation of the settlement. There's my outline and also the actual proposal for the ordinance. And
in your community, there's another little extra wrinkle to all of this, in that the majority of the communities that are impacted by the 3M settlement are served by municipal water, so that the community, the municipal water supply, like say for instance, the city of Cottage Grove, they can say, well, we're looking for supplements to our water filtration system to make the drinking water safe for our whole entire community, because they have municipal water.
it's central.
That's right, and it's centralized. But in your community, everybody has their own individual wells that they're tapping into the groundwater, which is the natural resource. That is what is the law, what the lawsuit was all about, is the groundwater.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so how are these council members going to come to bat for each of the homesteads and the residents in the city of Grant to make sure that the individuals' groundwater and their well water that they're getting from the groundwater, that they're going to have safe drinking water? How are they going to come up to bat when they can't even figure out how to put something on the agenda that's timely, that's pertinent, and that is definitely relevant?
Well, that is the subliminal ploy they have. They're ignoring it. So then what is going to happen if the groundwater does get contaminated? That will immediately force sewer and water into Grant. Now, mind you, 2 years ago, they, at the end of the sewer line on Lake Elmo, just south of Highway 36 and Lake Elmo Avenue, they just put in a pumping station with 4 50 horsepower motors instead of 10s or 15s. And why would you put a pumping station at the end of the line? It doesn't make any sense because there's nothing to pump. That is there for posterity, for future use. So if the groundwater, for example, would become contaminated, guess what? They'd have to run the water and sewer right up, like I say, it's a quarter mile south of 36, which is the border for the city of Grant. They'd be right in the central area of Grant to run water and sewer in it. If you wanted to drink clean water, guess what? You'd have to use that. Let's go to the next clip then, and they'll talk about discussion.
Motion to approve the
Now
regular
that we
agenda.
made a motion to approve, I'd like to open for a discussion,
No, we're gonna go ahead and vote.
Danny doesn't approve my changes.
Yeah, okay, so we have a first and a second to approve the regular agenda with the changes as stated.
After a motion, and you can verify this, once there's a motion and a second to be discussed, there normally is discussion. He's basically saying, no, we can't discuss this. Later on, he puts a motion out of order. So you'll see the pattern of behavior I'm trying to point out. They're not following the rules. They're doing everything they can to exclude us from participation in this democratic process. Simple as that.
Right, and it appears to me, I mean, I've been a mayor, I've run meetings, and it's very important to have consistent process throughout each and every meeting so that your fellow council members know what to expect. And so if you're making a motion and you've got a second, it is not only traditional, but Robert's Rules of Order, and the way that the process generally has gone on is that you then say, is there any discussion? And you open it for discussion, because that's when the discussion is to take place, is after there's a motion on the table. Now, what some councils do, which is contrary to that, is that they do a whole bunch of discussion first to see where everybody's sitting on the issue. Then they make the motion and take the vote, which of course is not really the way it's supposed to be done. But what I see when I'm watching these council meetings from the city of Grant is that sometimes it's one way, sometimes it's another way, sometimes it's a different way, that there is no rhyme or reason that is consistent and predictable. And when you have a meeting process that's not consistent, it's not predictable, it causes a lot of tension and issues. And so if they're wondering where the dysfunction and the disconnect is coming from, it's coming from the way that the meeting is run. It is run haphazard and with no direction.
Well, the other thing you have to realize, we're following the rules of Huber in the fiefdom of Carr and Huber. So in whatever way it goes, I mean, like last time we pointed out there wasn't a second and they voted on a motion.
Yes.
So it's really interesting.
Now, did we have a chance to look at those meeting minutes from last month to see if it noted that there was no second?
They didn't even have the motion in there.
Oh my gosh. Well, then how could they register the vote?
I did not see a second in there.
Wow. Now you see, that is irregular in and of itself, that you've got meeting minutes that don't register that there was a motion, no second was made, and then they took a vote, and yet now you're saying that it didn't even actually register there was a vote taken.
I did not see it in there. It took me an extra number of days to finally get the minutes.
Wow.
I mean, it wasn't, normally they put the minutes on as soon as they're completed, and then you get a copy in your packet. Well, I didn't see them until the packet, so they weren't even put on the website. There isn't a standard set of policies and procedures. It depends which way it's going. And I'll give you an example. The subcontractors like the Klein brothers, they detail a bill list and have a description of everything they've done. Well, except the law firm or Eckberg Glammers, we haven't got a bill from the new one yet. Eckberg Glammers would just put blank things there with numbers, no descriptions. The same thing for the guy that does the snow plowing and road trimming, etc. We get bills for mowing the ditches and trimming trees in January and February. Of course, we all know how much the grass grows in January, February. My goodness, it's hard to keep up with it. But I mean, it's not enumerated. They just put this in there that this is how much it is for this month. And it isn't an itemized bill. It's just a lump sum that they get. So he gets, his contract says it's $9,000 a month for 12 months. So he just chops so much off and puts every much in every month. He doesn't say, well, the snow plowing was 56 hours or blah, blah, blah. It's just a blank form, so we don't even know what we're getting. And,
right. And what's wrong with that scenario is that, first of all, your city clerk, when she gets that invoice, she should return it back to the contractor and say, this is not descriptive enough of the work that you have completed for these funds. Then let's say that she doesn't do that. She lets that invoice pass through, and that the approval for payment is then sitting with the council. It is then the council's responsibility as the oversight board of what the city clerk is doing and how the money is being spent. It is their responsibility to look at this and say, send this back. We need to have more detail, because that is part of their duty. And we heard Councilmember Carr indicate in one of those past clips about how this is a small town. Yes, it's a small town, and therefore I would say with it being a small town and the fact you only have about 3 contractors, that each and every one of those council members should be personally able to look at those invoices and make sure that there's proper itemization of the work completed for this small community.
An interesting addition to that is a year and a half ago, the clerk paid the same bill twice, and instead of have the contractor refunding the money, they just brought another equivalent load of gravel out to put on the road. And it was, by that time, it made a mess of the roads because, you know, and so, I mean, there's a couple competency questions here. The minutes are action only. In other words, they don't say anyone came up and spoke or anybody said anything. The minutes are dismal, to say the best. And all the contractors, we just they're talking about changing a stoplight on 12, and the Washington County assures that they're assuming liability, and the next clip up is asking if, in fact, there's certificates of insurance from that main road contractor, the snowplower that does brushing, and because they're supposed to have a workman's comp certificate of insurance. We have no idea, and that's what this next clip is talking about. So if we could play that clip, please.
For the city, in fact, should have a certificate of insurance.
Okay.
Do you know if anybody else in our city, if we carry those certificates of insurance for the work that's being done?
Before you answer that, Brad, what Mr. Lanu is asking is both a question for our insurance folks, as well as our legal staff, as well as probably our administrator. It is completely outside the scope of what we are voting on right here. And if that's something that you would like to have on the agenda perhaps for next month for discussion, Mr. Lanu, you can certainly bring it up.
I'll just ask our city auditor
if you
get
don't
the
mind.
answer.
Yep.
So much for transparency. They're hiding everything under a bushel basket. That's the modus operandi. You don't want to get a straight answer out of them.
And this is a very simple question that should be answered by the city clerk. She should just know whether or not that the city has on file the certificate of insurance that the contractors are required to carry. She should have that on file, and she should know that, and she should be able to answer it right then and there. There shouldn't be a question about it, and not, well, we'll discuss it next month. By that time, you could have had a workers' comp claim and find out there is no insurance, and then who is going to be responsible for the liability? And certainly, the city now has been put on notice that maybe there is a question about the certificate of insurance. They've been put on notice of that. And let's say you guys wait until next month to decide you're going to get an answer. And if an accident happens between now and then and there was no insurance certificate, well, I think they might look to the city.
Well, earlier this year, there was a subcontractor killed up in the city of Hugo. They were operating equipment, it was icy, and the young man, he was just 30 approximately, and he was killed. So it is important to have that certificate of insurance. The other interesting thing is we're kind of transitioning to the next clip, and it's very interesting on several levels because a female attorney from Indian Hills brought some charges against one of the people for the Charter Commission for using the little logo that home in the country. It's a little round circle with a picture of a house. Now, normally it was a part of a contest. The man that drew it...
And this, of course, this logo is the logo that the city of Grant uses on their letterhead, correct?
Yep, absolutely.
And so, and of course, they are thinking that that belongs to them, but this was, as you said, a part of a contest, and somebody drew it, but then they never transferred their rights to the city.
They never transferred the rights, and they never patented it or copyrighted it, okay? So it's open, because, for example, you do the Winter Carnival, you draw a designing button, and you've signed over the rights, and they have the rights to it. Okay, well, the other interesting thing is these people got special consideration, and they're getting their cul-de-sac overlaid, which sounds reasonable.
Okay, now, so which people are getting this special consideration?
The woman that filed the complaint against the person that was on the Charter Commission and took them to court. So now they have it signed off that they have 75% of the people and they're going to get it overlaid. But what's really interesting, the way they engineered it, they didn't do any engineering. They said, well, these are the three choices you have to take care of it, from an overlay to a patch and overlay to a grind up, a mill and overlay, into a complete reconstruction. So they let the people decide. Well, the problem is the contractor that put this subdivision in the 70s put a substandard road in. Normally, there's 2.5 inches of a base coat, which is on top of a gravel, 6 inches of gravel, and it's got larger rocks. And then on top of that, there's an 1.5 inch wear coat that just has sand and asphalt. And so it's about a 4-inch. Well, this particular road had an 1.5 inch wear coat over sand. So it's cracking, it's potholing, and they asked in the clip I didn't show you, they were asking the engineer what they were doing, and he said, no, are you gonna patch it and overlay it? And he says, no, we're just gonna overlay it. So their road policy is let them decide whatever they're gonna do, they're gonna pay for it, and this is gonna last 5 or 6 years and it's gonna fall apart.
So what I'm understanding you to say is that they're just gonna put an overlay on top of the faulty road base as it stands.
As it stands.
Oh, that sounds like good planning.
Yeah, you fail to plan, you plan to fail. In what this next clip, what Mr. Lanew's trying to do is there's another feeder road, and they're doing 1/3 of it at a time. And he's trying to get them say, well, can't you just on the bid, can't you get a bid for the last 1/3 of that road, because you'll save in terms of, because there's a destination charge to pack up, and he's trying to get this added just to get a bid to see what it would be, just to find out, getting information. And that's this next clip, and we'll talk on the other side.
Mill and overlay or a patch and overlay?
We're not doing a mill and overlay, it's just simply a 2-inch overlay on top of the existing roadway like we've done on Keats
In
Avenue.
other words, we're patching and repairing before we do the overlay.
No, it's basically a new pavement over the top of the existing pavement.
So, but you're not doing any work to fix any holes and stuff that's underneath it, or if you have any issues, you're not fixing it
We might
prior.
do some small patching, but it's not
Oh,
going to
okay.
be large.
That being, I just want clarification, because at this time, I'd like to make a motion to amend the advertising for bids for the 65th project to include a alternate bid item, to include the overlay of the remainder of Keats that the city has agreed to do. Now, the purpose for asking for amending this as a line item, you're gonna get a separate price when you go out there. You're gonna have the same probably company give you a price to do the 65th project.
Larry, I'm gonna stop you for a
No,
second,
you don't need to
please.
stop me, I have the floor, Mayor, but would you
Well,
please be
I want a
kind enough to
clarification.
listen?
Can I have a
And-
clarification?
No, that's why I'm giving you
No
clarifications,
clarification.
weren't so
Okay.
rude.
All right.
Okay, so at this point, I would ask that when we go out for advertisement for bid, we add a line item to finish the remainder approximately 2,500 feet of Keats.
Okay.
This will save us in the mobilization, and it may save us in tax dollars, and we'd actually honor the project we told those citizens we'd do in a 3-part.
Okay. Now,
Certainly, this makes complete sense to me. Having previously been an elected official for 4 years, we had many road projects come before us, and oftentimes they would look at what is the scope of the project and what are some of the feeder streets or other streets that are tied into the road project that are coming up on the list, that if we can include them in the project, it would be more efficient. more economical, and as Councilmember Lanou was saying, it decreases the amount of mobilization that's needed when you're taking care of your roads. Because after all, these are city roads, correct?
Right.
And they're not private roads. So it's one thing if you're talking about, private roads, but these are not. These are the city roads that are the city's responsibility. And so in the long run, if you could combine these two projects, it would be more efficient.
Well, they agreed to do this road in thirds. This year, another third is due. The last part of the road is going to be done. So what the point he was trying to make, if they're going to come out and do 65th or whatever the road is, why would you have them do the 65th one day and then come back a month later and do the rest of Keats?
Absolutely.
As long as they're there, have them do it. You can save some money. But again, as you see, any ideas that we have are no good. They vote them down. If they even let us complete our sentences or complete our presentations,
So
I'm lucky to get 2 minutes out when I'm talking.
So I'm assuming that this amendment to the motion failed.
Oh, absolutely. And
I wonder how much that's going to cost the city of Grant down the road when they have to haul the contractor back out there again a second time during the year to do that little spot of the road.
well, let me explain something else. We have a lake, there's a dirt road with a lake called Mud Pile Lake, and it's a slow bending curve. Since 1992, there have only 2 cars that have went off that road, and one of them didn't even go off on the lakeside or went off on the north side. So these guys decide they're going to spend their $28,000 or $30,000, but they come to find out they can only put 2/3 of the guardrail up that no cars are going in the ditch anyway on. I mean, this is just unbelievable. The lack of planning is absolutely shocking. With Steve Bono, when he was on, he was a road commissioner, he was on top and he helped them prioritize. They basically, this mayor and deputy mayor basically tossed the things to the engineer and the planner and say, go ahead and do it. And a classic example of that is that grading permit. And that ties back to the hydrovac, where the guy went in and got a grading permit and said, oh, I'm going to make them dig a pond to get some rocks. Well, here 2 months later, he's got 3 huge pieces of equipment. He's digging a number of holes down into the subsurface where there's gravel, and he's bringing 400 to 500 hydrovac trucks in. And they don't see a problem with that. I had to harp and jump up and down, and citizens were calling me, and they don't plan. And not only that, then they do amend the grading permit, and these guys don't even know what was in it. Huber was saying, oh, we can't have a manifest for every load that comes in. Well, guess what's in the grading permit? If you bring...
In the new revised grading permit.
Yes, the
right.
new revised grading permit, every load that comes in, you have to say where it's coming from. And if you haul a load out, you have to say where it's going to. 48 hours before work starts, you have to have it fully inspected and detailed by the building inspector. And there also has to be a $1,500 escrow right up front, in addition to whatever the permit is. So if you move 50 yards of dirt, which is 5 dump truck loads, you have to supposed to get a grading permit. And it's structured. Not only that, you can only do it between 7 in the morning and 7 at night, and only on Saturdays between 8 and 4 on an emergency basis. So these guys don't even know what's in the permit, and that's what I was pushing for, and I'm kind of chuckling. Before that, I was bringing up to the council, and I put it on the overhead, 23-245, which lists the type of wastes that aren't allowed. And one of the things...
Which is your current City of Grant ordinance.
Current ordinance that says no liquid waste will be deposited within 3,000 feet of a well. Now, I got half of that out, and I was interrupted by the mayor multiple times, talked over. I said, I said 70% of these are fine, but 30% aren't. And he immediately turns around and says, well, you said 90% of them are okay, so, well, even if 10% is bad, you know? And
How do you think our groundwater gets contaminated? Because there are 10% bad apples being dumped where it shouldn't be.
and it's just ridiculous. But here, what we're coming up to is the next clip is another example. And I don't know if you've heard of this in Robert's rules, because I know you've worked with it. Can a person that's running the meeting, can they just say that a motion's out of order? I mean, if a motion's made and seconded, I would think it would have to be at least discussed and put asunder. So that's what this next clip is. So if we can play that, we'll talk on the other side.
Or call the vote on the resolution number
I've got a motion and a second, and I'd like to have
2018-07.
further
You really
discussion.
don't, and I've called it out of order, sir.
second on
All
the
those
floor.
in favor of
Have a motion and a second on the
2018-07,
floor.
please say aye. Aye.
I just don't see how anybody can get their work done with a meeting being conducted in this fashion. It is preposterous, because you're exactly right. Somebody makes a motion. If it's seconded, then you discuss, then you put it up for a vote, and then they can just vote it down rather than shout it down. And that's what I see is going on here. Now they have their other process, not only to vote everything down, but to shout it down before it even gets to a vote. And that's just not right.
Oh, I would agree. They don't want us to participate. You will see, we'll have a couple clips. Of course, the last two clips are only short. That's when I'm putting the hydrovac ordinance once again up, and I explain it a little bit differently. But the next two clips are just brief clips again, and I want to show you something that actually worked. You know, so it isn't just we do get some things done, but it's very, very difficult. So if we could play the next clip, it's on a minor subdivision.
A1. The subject property is approximately 49 acres. We're actually looking at creation of a 10-acre lot and then a 39.11 acre lot, approximately. Actually, in this case, the smaller parcel is actually the parcel that the existing home and accessory building would be located on, and the 39.11 acre lot would be the parcel that is vacant.
That's kind of a highly unusual division. And I'm trying to give an example of what happens, what goes on. They're proposing a subdivision. It's been through the Planning Commission, which that doesn't mean anything because the solar farms, part of it was through a Planning Commission. They recommended it and they voted it down. Of course, that was...
The council voted it down.
Well, the majority did because it belonged to Joyce Welander and they're against her. They tried to take the fire marshal away of her duties before they realized they couldn't, that DNR does that. But... so that's an example. It's highly unusual that you have 50 acres and you take 10 acres in the house and leave the rest open. But obviously it's for future development is what someone's thinking at some point in time, so they can split the house off and still have, you know, their 10 acres and whatever. But the next clip is a corollary to this, and it shows us voting on the subdivision.
So this time I'd like to make a motion that if they're in agreement with the resolution put in front of them in light of the information given to by the mayor, that we accept this resolution for subdivision.
I seconded it.
Okay, gentlemen. Just one other quick question before we go there, and we can go ahead and vote on that. Sorry, Jen, I lost my place talking on the road there. Nope, you already answered it. All those in favor of Larry's motion to approve 2018-05, the request for a minor subdivision for the Wegleitners, please signify by saying aye. Aye.
In this clip, we saw how they had a motion, had a second, and then the mayor paused to allow himself time to decide if he had questions or further discussion. And since it was taken care of, then he called the vote. So I do see that when there are questions or discussion on his part, that he does make certain that there is room and time for that before the vote is taken. Now, I would suggest that if you would have had a question or discussion and he had none, you wouldn't have had the time allotted to you to decide and look at your notes thoughtfully to discover if all your questions had been answered.
Absolutely. When I bring information in, and I had a long discussion with the clerk about telling me, oh, you don't need to have all this stuff in the packet when you put it under discussion. And I said, yes, I do, because if I don't have documentation, they harp and say, well, you don't have anything in the packet, we're not going to discuss it. And when we do have it in the packet, they won't even let me finish discussing it. So that's kind of how that goes. And I think the next clip is we're talking about putting things on the agenda again. So if we could play that, we'll talk on the other side. But I think, just in the interest of transparency, you know, if we put it on the regular agenda just anyway, we can, if everything comes through, it'll just be a quick vote, it'll be done. But I think we should at least have it on the regular agenda, because loading up the consent agenda seems to be kind of shifty to me. It's kind of a way of getting around the democratic process. Put it on there, it looks really good. We have a couple minor technicalities to take care of. Just bring it back, discuss it. Hey, if it's A-okay, we're going to have a vote and it's going to be done. But I really think it should be put on the regular agenda, you know, just as a matter of principle.
Okay.
Mayor and council members,
yep.
may I add that the city has done things like this both ways. The intent of bringing this forward was, again, to review the final plat, get your comments, make sure you have no red flags, things that needed to be changed. That's why there's not a resolution in your packet. Again, there's been other projects that we've had your discussion, the changes have been made, and the resolution has come back on the consent agenda.
The consent agenda is only for those items of which are regular and routine for the council, and of which there is little or no discussion at all. So simply put something such as the payroll, for instance, or you know, the day-to-day routine things that the council needs to approve. But this idea that you've got something that has changes and revisions that need to be made, that there needs to be council discussion on, I agree with you. That should be either under new business or old business, whatever is appropriate.
Well, in this particular case, this is a 300-acre subdivision that's pretty bizarre, okay? They're saving the 2 tracks. It's on Lake Elmo Avenue and 12. The high drive farm ground, the 120 acres there roughly, is going to be open land. It's just going to stay farm fields. On the south end of the land, there's a bunch of little potholes and swampy areas, and they're weaving the roads around there to hit the lowlands and making the lots 5 to 7 acres. And they've gerrymandered it, which is a good word, so they can put these houses on there, and there's just going to be a place for the house and a place for the septic. And it's really kind of unusual the way they're doing it, but I'm sure the idea is on future development it'll be commercial. But they had 3 legal questions, and the people did an extensive job. I think it was the Farms of Grant. Now they're calling it the White Oaks or development or something. They had 3 legal questions that had to be taken care of. They have a homeowners association ruling on this, and they wanted to make sure that whether or not the major parcels were in that or not. So it was just 3 legal questions, and to throw this on the consent agenda so these things can't be discussed, especially issues that are legal, is ludicrous.
Yes.
We want to have it, and the people did an excellent job, but these are main catches here that we have to make sure are in place. And have you heard the clerk say, oh, we put things on the consent agenda? Yeah, the reason they do that is to eliminate discussion. They don't want any, it's like they're always trying to slip something under the rug, under the table, whatever it is. It's just crazy.
And in my estimation, any item that has to do with a land use, a variance, a subdivision, a CUP, planned unit development, any of those types of land use issues that come before a council should never be on a consent agenda because they are not routine in nature. That's why you have to have specific findings of fact in order to approve or deny a conditional use permit. They are not routine. That's why a variance, you have to be able to meet certain criteria because it is not routine. So any of these types of land use issues that come before the council should never be on a consent agenda.
The next clip, they're talking about a planning commission appointment. Now, they went out for vacancies, nobody applied. Nobody wants to be on there, basically. So they're trying again just to do it quick and dirty, we're just gonna reappoint all of them. And this next clip is about that because there was an open meeting violation. That's a whole nother story, but this is what this next clip is about.
A friendly amendment to the motion to table the appointment of Mr. Tufti until it's determined that he has or has not participated in an open meeting violation as a planning commissioner, as we are in litigation, and so we're just gonna rubber stamp and just say, let's put him on, he participates in open meeting violation.
Okay.
Let's table his appointment until it's determined by the court that he either does or does not participate in open meeting violations.
Now I understand it. Thank you very much, Mr. New. This is actually Mr. Lanu.
The question is, if you know that there is pending litigation involving one of your commission members, and specifically that commission member is accused of violating the open meeting law, should he be just automatically reappointed to that commission? Well, that is a council decision to be made, and it is good that Councilmember Lanu brought this up so that the council can think about that public policy, because whatever public policy that they establish by the direction that they take is then the public policy of that board. So if they think it's okay for one of their commission members that they favor to be involved in litigation and still serve on the planning commission, then they would have to think it's also okay for a city council member to continue to be a council member even though he's been sued. You see what I mean?
Oh, absolutely.
You can't have two standards, and yet they are trying to pressure council member Larry Lanu into, abdicating his seat in essence by the fact that he's been sued by the city. So I see that there's a conflict here that, they have one standard for the people that they favor and a different standard for the people that they do not favor.
Well, what's really interesting, the second month that Larry was on, after he was elected, they brought a measure up that wasn't on the agenda, it wasn't under discussion. They brought a full-blown censure situation up, written up by the attorney ahead of time. Who directed, when I say something, they say, oh, you can't direct staff, the whole council has to direct staff to do things. Well, who directed the Sandstrom from Eckberg-Lammers to revise that? Somebody, when was the vote taken? So there's a lot of behind the scenes violation of open meeting laws. In this particular instance that he's talking about, we have a picture of 3 or 4 planning commission members. The Tufti is obscured by another person, but you can see the outline of his white hair and his clothes. 4 members from the planning commission, the planner and the city clerk, and they're all looking at a screen 20 minutes after the meeting has closed, discussing what's on the screen. So, and of course, Sandstrom reviewed it. Oh no, he denied he was there. He wasn't there. I mean, obviously, he didn't even investigate it. It wasn't brought forward. And so this is part of a lawsuit for violation of open meeting law, which is there's pictorial evidence, not allowing the city hall to be used, and not posting meetings properly. So this is going forward, that and following Robert's rules. Its depositions are going to be taken the 20th. So there's a lot of this stuff. I can't believe if you wanted to violate all the rules, I don't know how you could do a better job than what these guys are doing. I mean, everything is, it's like there's two sets of rules. You know, it's heads I win, tails you lose. That isn't a way to run a city.
Heads I win, tails I win. Up next, we have an update on what's going on with the hydrovac situation in the city of Grant. And I understand that, Mr. Sederstrom, you have an update for our viewers on some fines that have been levied.
Oh, and you will see this in the next clip. I mentioned that the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency had sued Morehouse $3,500.
Fined them?
Fined them $3,500 for the illicit dumping and disturbing more than 1 acre of ground and not having a MPCA permit. So if we could play the next clip, we'll talk on the other side. About the hydrovac situation, we've all seen the news. There's what, a $850 million settlement for water quality. To denote the seriousness of this, the MPCA, in fact, levied a $3,500 fine against the hydrovac operator, the person that was dumping it. 400 hydrovacs were dumped on a Saturday night. 6 of them came in from 3M, and I think we need to address this. Washington County is in a crisis in terms of water quality. We have to protect our water. We have to do something about that. In Egan, that 2,100-gallon gasoline spill was picked up with hydrovacs. That's fine for a massive spill, they can manage that. But people, when they order a hydrovac, the guy that's going out doesn't know what he's picking up till he gets there. As citizens of Grant need to protect their water, we have to get an ordinance to not allow hydrovacs to be discharged in the city of Grant because we don't know what are in them. Again, it's problems. The MPCA fined this man $3,500 for the illicit discharges. Okay, so it's a problem.
Find whom, Loren?
The owner of the hydrovac and the owner of the property. It is public record. You can.
Morehouse, can you say it?
Thank you very much.
Actually, and I'd like to thank Mr. Sederstrom for bringing the issue forward, making it aware to our planning commission. Mr. Sederstrom has been pretty diligent about looking for the health, safety, and welfare of the citizens of Grant, whereas our mayor seems to be overlooking
Hold on.
Hold on. We don't want to be handing any compliments out to anybody. Heaven forbid.
Well, we have another clip, and this is the former Mayor Carr, and you might even get a chuckle out of this one. He's protesting against this, so if we could play the next clip.
They care a lot, about a lot of stuff, none of which we can do anything about, none of which is in our packet. Loren,
You cannot have the floor, sir.
there we go again. Loren cares about vac trucks, so do I. I do care about them. I don't like what happened, okay? Loren, there's something about 3M, and we care. So what can we do? We are here to run the city, to vote, and to go home. And caring doesn't just mean caring and throwing it out there. Caring means enough to actually do something about it and come forward with a plan. If you are that invested in it, then care and bring something forward. Don't come saying you care and then let us do the work. I mean, I don't understand that question. I don't understand that whole philosophy. If you care enough to do something about this, then bring something forward that's logical, that makes sense, that is substantive, that we can vote on or do something about, not all these rantings about stuff that you care about. Because I care too, but it doesn't help. This doesn't help. And a lot of this stuff is at a higher level than us. The county should be handling, I've talked to the environmental guy at the county. This is happening everywhere. And no law, no ordinance that we can pass will stop them from dumping. Okay, you have to figure out a better way to do that. And you gotta stop them where they're pulling it out. I mean, that's where it stops. So, while I appreciate their sentiment and their caring, this doesn't help us. And at this point, I do not want this on the agenda because there's nothing to talk about. Right.
I find this totally ironic, because when we're talking about the changes that were made to the permit, I know specifically that Councilmember Carr was one of the individuals who suggested that a manifest be required. I know that because we played that clip on these programs. And you see, so that is something he can do at the local level because he cares. And certainly I know, Mr. Sederstrom, you have put together an ordinance that would make it illegal for this type of dumping, and that is something substantive, and that if somebody violates it, you know what the city does then? They charge them with criminal violations. That's what's done. You don't just sit around and say, well, we have to do it at the beginning point. That's where it has to stop. Well, then what are you going to do when the big spill happens? You're just going to leave the spill there because you care?
Well,
that is illogical.
Well, the other funny thing about that is not only had the article from the newspaper, I had that piece of paper I was holding up was a description and the specific ordinance completely written out. No, you bring things here and we do all the work. He wouldn't have to do one thing. I had it written there. All it has to be is adopted. And so once again, he's lying, and notice how snarky he was. No, you care. Yeah, that's right, I care. Yeah.
And I like it how he infers that they, the three of them, are doing all the work.
They do nothing.
I haven't seen much work coming from the three of them. Now, we have another clip having to do with comments made by the mayor. Let's take a look.
But the common sense facts are this: a hydrovac and a dump truck can carry exactly the same material. That material may be clean fill, that material may be contaminated. We don't know. Each of those conveyances, called a conveyance, can bring in contaminated material, it can bring in clean fill material. And frankly, trying as a city of 4,000 people on a budget of $1 million, it is over our pay grade. There are certain things that this city is not going to be able to handle, especially something like this. And that's exactly why we have a dumping ordinance, where we do not accept materials from any source in any conveyance that...
He talks out of both sides of his mouth. And first of all, I do want to say that if you put a wet water slurry in a dump truck, I don't think that wet water slurry would stay in the dump truck for very long.
Oh, I agree. Now we're going to finish up with exactly the ordinance that I wrote. And I actually got a chance to talk a second time, which is highly unusual. Gave the background information, the exact wording for the amended change to 32-245. The discharge of a hydrovac vehicle is not allowed in Grant because the city relies on individual wells as the water source. Discharges such as these will not be allowed in Grant. Penalties for discharges start at $1,000 and triple each incident thereafter. I did my research. I've talked to Washington County Environmental. Yes, there's a lapse. But does that mean because they haven't engaged it on a state level, we should continue to have it happening here when we're already having massive problems? Look at the $850 million settlement that 3M has. We should take steps to be proactive instead of wait in the bushes and let's see what the big guys do. Doesn't make any sense.
Mr. Sederstrom, definitely you have been doing the work. So Councilmember Carr would be good to move his chair over to your side of the table where the heavy lifting is being done. Now with that, Mr. Sederstrom, I want to thank you very much for being on the program this week.
Well, thank you very much. I'm very glad that I'm able to be on here and get the information out. This will be coming up. We have some other things coming up next month that'll be very interesting. We've got a private lawsuit that's against the city that they didn't have the closed meeting with, but we'll have the results of that next month. And I will update you on all the wonderful little misgivings that are happening in Grant.
Thank you very much. And viewers, thank you for tuning in to Off the Record News. We'll see you again next week. Bye-bye.
hearing, Kim, is that okay? Yep. All right, well, let's go ahead and open the public hearing for the interim ordinance placing a temporary moratorium on solar farm facilities in the city and directing a study to be conducted so that we can learn more about this issue as a council. I would really appreciate it if you come on up to the microphone, give us your name and address, and talk to us about this moratorium, what you think of it, and what you think it can do for the city, and what you think we should be perhaps be studying as we move forward on this issue. Anyone here to speak on this, please? Second call for the moratorium on solar farm facilities, please. Public hearing. All right. Do we need a vote to close the public hearing, Kim?
I would like a motion in a second.
Looks like we have no one here. Can I get a motion in a second to close this, please?